Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. So let's talk about zeros. And when I mean zeros, I mean rifle zeros. Okay. This comes into play because I went elk hunting this weekend with my brother and my nephew and my best friend. One of my best friends and listeners of the New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. We decided we were going to go elk hunting. My brother was dead. I'm not too much into hunting anymore. But it reminds me a lot of my dad. That's probably why I don't like hunting as much as I used to. I don't get the thrill out of it as much as I used to. But zero came up today. And the reason why it came up is I had one shot on target, and I missed my elk by about 1.5 feet. And I know why. I have one of the BDC scopes. So if you don't know what BDC stands for, it stands for Bullet Drop Compensator. And I've neglected, this was in the earlier morning, so just legal to shoot. So maybe an hour after sunrise, maybe 45 minutes before sunrise or after sunrise. And normally during that type of light, I would turn on my illuminated reticle so I could see better. I didn't do this, so I took a snapshot. And when I took the first shot, I heard the range from my best friend, who really wasn't hunting. He was coyote hunting with us. He was just with us more so than anything. He didn't even pull his gun. But he knows where the elk are. He was very much a guide today. And when we first saw them, they were at 550 yards. Now, I've zeroed my 308 that I was using, and I used to think I was pretty damn good with it until today. So what happened was I hit a foot low, about 1.5 feet low, actually, I think, the first time I squeezed the trigger on it. And then the second time, that's because I got the range estimate wrong. I didn't hear him say 550. I thought he said 350, which makes a difference with a BDC. So then, the next time I got on the same group of elk, I got a range estimate of 450 yards. And when I say range estimate, Dexton was, my friend Dexton, he was using a laser rangefinder, so he knew exactly how close they were. And I picked my target, and when I looked through the reticle, I used the wrong tick mark for 350 yards, not 450 yards. So I missed again. Okay. Now my brother took a shot at 550 yards because it was at the top end of where these elk were. So there was a string of elk. There was basically a small herd. And he squeezed and he hit way to the left. And I think what his problem was is he had buck fever. And he's using a very heavy gun. So he was using an AR-10, and I'm using one of my PTRs. Now, the second shot, I should have braced up off the hood of the vehicle or laid down, because both of which were very close to where we were shooting. And I didn't do that. I tried to do an offhand snapshot. Bad on me for trying to take a long shot with not being braced. Now, my nephew, he laid down and was getting ready to brace up and was getting ready to take the shot. But he didn't make the first shot, meaning he didn't take a shot until later in the day, where he and my brother ran up on some elk, and he still missed. And then after talking to him after we had ran into these elk in 2 different places, I started realizing that something my dad had been teaching us when we were kids came back to haunt us today. My dad used to have us zero a rifle, didn't matter what caliber, 3 inches eye at 100 yards. And he used to think that was bullet drop compensating for 300 yards. Now, it's somewhat true for the 270, depending upon the caliber, or not the caliber, the bullet weight, but it's not really even for it. What he needed to do was understand the dope or the bullet drop for what happens for a given weight of bullet at a distance. And he didn't understand that, or I knew he understood it, he just never did it. Or if he did it, he did the calculation so well in his head, which is kind of what I'm leaning towards more so than anything, that my dad understood that zero and compensated automatically at those longer distances, because my dad has taken 500 and 600 yard shots and reliably hit them with one round, cold bore. That was before he passed away. So what I've always done is, first off, I start with bore sighting my gun. So I laser bore sight my rifle at about 25 yards. And if you don't know what that means, you take a laser bore tool, you insert it in the bore of the gun, and you align your scope to roughly where that dot is. Now what this should do is put you on paper at 50 yards or 100 yards, depending upon the caliber. I usually then step it out to 50 yards when I actually do some shooting and verify that I did in fact bore sight it correctly and that it is at least on paper, like close to where I need it to be. Then I usually take it out to 100 yards or 110 yards, which is 100 meters, depending upon the scope that I'm using, or depending upon the irons I'm using. I like to shoot metric rifles. Metric rifles tend to be in meters. So knowing that a meter is 10% bigger matters, especially at distance. So what we were all shooting, my nephew, my brother, and myself, were 150 grain Sierra boat tails or Hornady boat tails, one or the other. They should all fly similarly. Okay. What we had to have this conversation with, and my friend Dexton got involved, and we were trying to explain to my nephew that you're going to have to aim about 47.4 inches higher above the target. So you're going to use Kentucky windage, or you're going to have to dope your scope. Now, he doesn't understand doping, and I'll have to explain that to him at a later date, which I will do if my nephew ever bothers to listen to this. I'm sure his mama's trying to push him, my sister-in-law, who's amazing, is going to push him to listening to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. Speaking of which, my listenership is way down from where it was, so I think I'm going to start trying to do nightly podcasts again to drop in the morning so that they'll restart at 8 in the morning. They won't be as long, so they'll be about 15 minutes long. I'll try to keep them short for you guys. And I'm going to try to stir in some better stuff. I've said this multiple times, but it's time to start talking about things like I am right now instead of guns and politics, talking about the practicalities of shooting and things that actually make me excited. Now, I'm a big fan of long-range shooting, so there is no excuse for me today other than, to be blunt, I didn't really care about hitting my elk or trying to get an elk. I've kind of done that, got the t-shirt. I don't get that much of a thrill of it anymore. Although I haven't shot at anything for about 5 years, so maybe it was me getting a little bit more buck fever than I want to admit. That's very possible. And we were hunting cows, so cow elk. So, to get back what I was saying about zeroing your weapon. I zero mine at 100 yards or 110 meters, like I said. The reason why I do that is then it gives me a point of reference for extended ranges. So this is where we need to start having conversations about the caliber you're using, and you need to look up and find out what that bullet does at given distance, okay, and that bullet weight. So if you don't know this, a bullet, when you fire it from your gun, basically makes a miniature rainbow or parabola, okay? And it usually intersects at a certain place. That's where you zero your gun, from the line of sight of your scope and where the bullet intersects, that line that those two cross at a given distance. That's your zero, okay? Now, why does that matter? It matters so that you know at those extended distance how much to raise your scope, dope your scope, or adjust it left or right for windage, or to use Kentucky windage. If you don't know what Kentucky windage is you're not adjusting your scope, because a lot of older scopes and a lot of even some of the really high-end newer guys like Leopold don't have the turrets that are made to be adjusted. You're supposed to zero your scope, and then you're supposed to use the reticle or know how far something is and aim above that. So if you're using Kentucky windage and you're shooting at something at 550 yards, so say this is an elk, and an elk is usually about 28 inches tall from their body. So if you're wanting to hit midpoint of that elk, you're going to probably aim with a 308. You're going to aim 2 body widths above it. Okay, so you may not be looking directly at the target when you're using Kentucky windage. You're using your reticle to aim at a point in space, and you're going to squeeze the trigger. And what you're doing with that is you're actually compensating for the bullet. Now, modern shooting theory says you're supposed to dope your scope or have the high end enough optics that you can adjust the turret up or down, left or right, the adjustments for your scope, so that you can rapidly get to those places, get to those range distances that you're going to adjust for the bullet drop, and take your shot. There are other things that happen. If you've looked at Primary Arms, they have something called the ACSS reticle and the Athena or the HUD reticle, and that's what I have on one of my rifles. The one I was hunting with today has the ACSS, and it's calibrated for 308, but you need to be able to zero it first at 100 yards with the given weight of bullet you're supposed to. So they have, last time I looked, they have 147, 150, 168, and 165 grain that you can zero it with. And I may be wrong about the 150, and I may have to use 147. But in practice, what I've noticed with between 147 grain NATO ball rounds and my reloads for 150, they're about the same for bullet drop. So I use that same mentality or that same drop when I shot to zero my gun. What I've noticed is even at extended distances, I've taken 300-yard shots before with this particular scope on this particular rifle and was still hitting the targets I was engaging at the time. So it's more so a function of the shooter today than a function of the gun. But it gets back to that very important lesson that a 270 is going to have a different bullet trajectory at extended distances than, say, a 308. A 223 is going to have a dramatically different trajectory at 500 meters or 500 yards than it is at 100 yards or than at a 308 is even going to have. Now, the 308 and the 5.56 seem to be kind of twins ballistically in a lot of ways for their trajectories, but it does differentiate when you don't have as much powder capacity behind it and as much energy behind the bullet, and the bullet is more prone to wind drift than a 308 is. Same thing with a 6.5 Creedmoor. A 6.5 Creedmoor is basically a 6.5 308, the way I see it. Okay, but it has, because of the ballistic coefficient of the bullet, and that when you start getting into this stuff where you're figuring out bullet trajectories, drops, how much you have to aim left or right for the wind, depending upon the wind values you have, ballistic coefficient comes really big into play. Okay, and that's how perfect the bullet flies in the air, how sound it is to fly through the air. And the 6.5 is one of those rounds bullets that is very ballistically capable. It has less drop at extended distance than a 308, but it has a lot less kinetic energy behind it. Case in point, the heaviest bullet I've seen for the 6.5 Creedmoor is 140 grain. Okay, for the 270 or for the 308, same basic case capacity or similar, I've seen 168 grain, but I know you can get a 30 grain bullet or a 30 caliber bullet, a 308 caliber bullet up to 220 grains. Now that makes a big difference with case capacity because you're not going to get as much powder behind it and not as much punch behind it with those heavier bullets because they're longer. They're going to give you more bearing surface, which makes them fly better, but they're also going to be moving a lot slower because there's not enough case capacity or not enough powder behind it to detonate and make the push out the bore. Thus, you enter into the realm of like the 30-06 and the 270. Now, the 270 is just a neck-down 30-06. okay, in terms of reloading, okay. Instead of being a .308 caliber bullet, it's a .277 caliber bullet, or 6.8 millimeter, however you want to roll with that. What you find is the ballistics are dramatically different than a .308 because there's more case capacity. The bullet isn't as heavy, or isn't as ballistically cumbersome. Let's put it that way, because you can get a 150 grain 270 bullet, and it will not have the same trajectory as a .308, because there's more case capacity. When you start getting into magnums, that same weight bullet will have a lot more energy behind it, so it'll shoot flatter at longer distances. Long and the short of what I'm trying to get to is you need to understand basic ballistics and understand bullet drop. If you're going to hunt or if you're going to engage any kind of target, you need to know how to do that. And today was a prime example that I myself didn't pay enough attention or was cocky enough to think that I could just pull up my rifle and it was still going to do exactly what I wanted it to. Or that I didn't pay enough attention to my reticle when I squeezed the trigger. And I missed my game animal, or I missed my target. Now, my brother and my nephew, same thing. But neither one of them were under the impression that they would be shooting that far, one. And number two, that they were underestimating what the bullet drop would do. They were still under the impression of what my dad had been teaching us since we were very little, that 3 inches will do up to 300 yards, and that is nowhere near the case. I think the bullet drop on a .308 is somewhere around 10.5 inches at 300 yards. I may be wrong, because I may be thinking about multiple calibers today, because I was doing some research before I started this conversation in my head to get ready to podcast. But it gets back to the quick. It cuts to the quick very quickly. If you're going to use one caliber all the time for everything, it doesn't take much to look up the bullet drop and to compare your load, whatever hand load you're using or whatever factory ammo you're using, to what those ballistics should be. Okay. Now, my friend suggested something that, I've done forever and never paid attention to. He suggested making your dope card, basically. Basically putting the bullet drop on a card and taping it to the inside of your rifle so you can look down and see what that is. Now, I used to do that with a wristband, and I would put my dope card on it. That would tell me my bullet drop and my wind values. And I also, because I was taught how to shoot by snipers other than my dad, I used to carry a dope book. So a dope book or ballistics book would allow you to write what each load you were using and keep a record of what it was doing through the bore of your rifle, if it was cold or hot, and that does matter, because a cold bore shot that means there's no heat in the gun. That means that the copper of the jacket of the bullet isn't going to expand as much and fill in there and get as much pop, basically, because it hasn't a chance to expand as much, which is ever so slightly more with a hot bore shot, into the lands and grooves of the rifling. Same thing goes with your cartridge. If your cartridge is cooler, the whole cartridge, you're going to get less efficient burn. If you actually talk to snipers, they will take their rifle rounds out, their magazines that they're using in their DMRs or their sniper rifles. They'll lay them out in the sun to let them warm up just slightly so that they get a more efficient burn when they squeeze the trigger. Now, when I say burn, what I mean is the firing pin hits the primer ignites the powder. You're getting more efficient burn with a warmer case cartridge than you would if it was cooler, because it takes more energy to heat up all of that stuff. Now, what really happens is you're causing that brass to expand more fully when you fire it so that you get a better gas seal around the entire cartridge in the chamber, which allows the gas pressure to build up just slightly better. Again, this is tick for tack. There's not a lot here. But when you're worried about making those 1,000-yard shots or 500-yard shots, every little thing counts. How you squeeze the trigger counts. How your gun is set up counts. How comfortable you are with shooting the gun. You know, my brother and myself were shooting guns that are in excess of 10 pounds today. His AR-10 with all the battle rattle he has on it is easily close to 10 pounds. My PTR, my HK93, or 91 basically, G3 rifle, weighs in at 9.75 ounces, or 9.75 pounds, unloaded, without any optics. Okay, I was carrying a 20-round magazine because I can in the state of New Mexico, and my scope, while not super heavy, makes that gun even heavier. I should have braced up. I should have laid up and done what I did, to take the shot. That's not what I did. I tried to pull a snapshot like my dad had always taught me to do. Now, I can do it, but I shouldn't have tried to take a 450-yard shot or a 550-yard shot with a snapshot. I should have taken my time, taken my rest, and then squeezed the trigger. So lessons learned all the way around again by myself, just reinforced. If it wasn't my father just screwing with me, saying I should have taken my damn 270 because I'm a hell of a lot better shot with my 270 or with my dad's 270 than I am with my 308. And I have, in all honesty, for hunting elk, I probably should have taken my dad's 270 or my 270 and ended it right there. I probably would have walked out with my elk this morning. But instead, I decided to overrule my head and just hunt with the rifle that I feel most confident with. And maybe I need to spend more time with my rifles. In the last year, because of the storm I've been going through with career changes, trying to start a business and that not firing off so well, I haven't had the funds to go out and do as much recreational shooting as I used to. And it's starting to show. Shooting is a perishable skill. You need to go out and you need to shoot consistently. Now with like my AR-15 and my Kalashnikovs, I still manage to get enough shooting or trigger time with them that I'm still fairly good with those. But I think I need to refocus back on my 308 and my 270 and those longer range guns that I have neglected in this season of my life. So please like, share, subscribe. Let everybody know about New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. There's some stuff that's going on in the news that I will brief you on tomorrow. Be great.